Hello and welcome to 2030 and Beyond with me, Sandi Adams, and I'm really excited to introduce my next guest. He's one of the fastest growing and most controversial voices on YouTube. And we're going to find out who he is today, why he's controversial, and why this conversation really matters right now. So I'd like to welcome young Bob to 2030 and Beyond. Hello, young Bob.
Hello, pleasure for being on. Thanks for having me. I wouldn't describe myself as controversial. I just think that I'm quite a dogmatic person. So inevitably, I disagree with people that even overlap with my own opinions. But I don't know. I think I'm just weird to work with. That's why I'm so controversial.
Well, that can be a good thing. Let's face it. At the moment, we kind of need kind of conversations you're having are really needed right now. Some people might find you divisive, would you say that some people think that you might be dividing people? But tell me why you think these conversations are really important right now.
So I would say that the biggest issue with politics and just everyone to begin with is political tribalism and religious tribalism as well. If you look at like sectarian violence and like mass migration. So I'm not divisive as so much as I'm just highlighting the fact that people are already divided, and people, like the British have always been, are really polite, and we don't want to acknowledge that we are a divided society. So that is why it is better for someone to just say, I'm divisive, than to acknowledge that both sides on the political spectrum are already divided and hate each other.
Exactly. Now, you set up Project Britannia and worked for a while with Turning Point UK. Tell me about how you got to be where you are now. How did you start off? Why did you start doing this?
Yeah, so I really came from a sort of religious aspect. I started out at Speaker's Corner, and for those who don't know, it's a very well-known, I call it the car boot fair of wackos and just debating religious nutters and politicians. It started out, I think it's over 100 years old. Karl Marx famously went out and debated there. It was really something for politics, for people to debate, the politics of the time. But then after 9/11, unfortunately, Islam and a lot of Muslims living in the United Kingdom felt like it was the perfect tool to sort of edit people's perceptions of Islam to something that's more comfortable, something that's a bit more flim-flam, something that really comforts people. And that inevitably brought in droves of other religious groups of people, because if you're convincing people to join Islam, inevitably means you have to attack other religious groups because, these people are Christians. You need to deconstruct the Christian faith before you give them Islam. So that's Speaker's Corner. And when I was about 15, this was sort of during the time I was in year 11, so just a year as I was about to leave secondary school going into college. I was heavily involved in online dialectic. So I was just speaking with people on the internet about religion, trying to traverse what religion compels me to join. So I went to, different religious institutes. I visited mosques, churches, other temples of worship. And going on the internet whilst also visiting these sites, I slowly, just from my algorithm pushing me religious content, found Speaker's Corner, thought it was really interesting, thought that what I was already doing on the internet exists in real life. So I took a visit with my dad during the summer when I was transitioning to year 11 to college. Then there's a lot of cameramen. It's sort of a circus of grifters now, just people trying to film other people's debates because it's quite engaging. And someone filmed my first debate with a famous Muslim apologist called Mansour. And there was an already well-established Speaker's Corner figure called Bob. And the way I learn is quite fluid. So it's almost like assuming the way that someone speaks, assuming their way of thinking. And because I was watching Bob of Speaker's Corner quite frequently, I picked up a lot of his like mannerisms and rhetoric. So someone who was filming, just simply because we're both white and we sound the same, called me a younger version of Bob.
So Bob isn't your real name. What, you've got a real name, but you became the young Bob. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I sort of had this false sense of anonymity that if you like hide your name, you can hide your identity. But we live in a surveillance state.
Yeah.
If a picture of your face is out there, obviously they're going to be able to find your name. So it was pretty redundant, but I thought at that time it was pretty cool. I mean, it, slowly being exposed to more figures who are on the internet. What I do find is that it's pretty numbing just to know these people. I thought it was really cool back in the day to know a
Mm.
lot of these figures that I used to see on my phone, but now I just notice they're regular people. So that's what sort of fueled into having like an alias. Because I was working at McDonald's at the time and I was in college, so I didn't really want to people to find out. They inevitably did, which was really interesting considering I lived in an area that's quite demographically replaced and also quite liberal. So you could imagine the sort of interactions I had with college students at the time.
Absolutely. I mean, when did you realize that you said you sort of explored other faiths? When did you realize that Christianity was something that you really thought this is what I want to align myself to?
I mean, there were small things, right? So, of course, the most famous Christian sort of apology, like a defense of the Christian faith, is the fact that we are the religion centered and grounded in Christ, and that all other religions have something to say about Christ. So, odds are likely that the religion that centers itself around Christ is more plausible. The
Mm.
historical evidence as well. I wasn't so moved by the Shroud of Turin, but that was certainly a piece of contemporary evidence, which is quite compelling. Looking into the arguments surrounding the Gospels and their authenticity as well, but also just a spiritual and personal interaction with God. One of the churches that I visited was a church that I ended up being confirmed in, which was an Orthodox church, a Greek Orthodox church that my friends invited me to. Because at the time I was looking into religion whilst also going to Speaker's Corner. So one of the Speaker's Corner speakers, who doesn't go there that much now, invited me over to his Orthodox church. And Orthodoxy is just so compelling for a lot of men as well. That's why you're seeing in Stroves this what is supposed to be an Eastern faith. It's not supposed to be really found in the West. There's so many converts. The day I got confirmed, which was the day that Lazarus raised from the dead, 15 other people were confirmed at my church. Another over 100 people were baptized in another church right next to it. And the bishop had to come in and actually help with the baptisms. So it seems like Orthodoxy is quite popular just simply because it is traditional, it is rigid, it hasn't changed from history. Christianity, of course, being constitutionally and natively the religion of this country, which is another reason why most young men who are British tend to move towards Christianity, and just the fact that Orthodoxy is in itself the most historical and the most
Mm.
accurate and authentic tradition of the church back from the time of the apostles.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So, are you actually baptized and confirmed into the Orthodox Church?
Yeah, so I was cradily baptized Catholic, and
Mm.
it's always a discussion on the internet. You have different schools of thought on whether another denomination's baptism is valid. I'm of the opinion, because I've read some church fathers like Saint Augustine on it, that simply the form of the baptism is valid, but the sort of grace that you receive from baptism is received through confirmation,
Mm.
because that is really what starts your journey as a Christian without just being baptized as a baby. There's a sort of different weight between you being baptized as a baby because you have no say in it. It's necessary to remit original sin,
Mm.
and for you to be confirmed because that's more of a decision that you take as you're being catechized into the church. So I was cradily born Catholic and then confirmed into the Orthodox Church, I think 2 years ago, celebrating Lazarus raised from the dead, because Orthodox churches traditionally do their baptisms and confirmations in blocks. And the reason why we do it on Lazarus raising from the dead, for people who don't know, Lazarus was one of the resurrected humans prior to the
Mm.
crucifixion of our Lord. And there's
Mm.
actually iconography of Lazarus looking down, and I think he didn't actually like he wasn't visibly happy afterwards because he was in hell, he was in Sheol because
Mm.
Christ at that point hadn't been crucified, the sacrifice wasn't given. So what he
Absolutely,
was
yeah.
experiencing was the natural consequences of original sin in our corrupted world, and that is why it's so important that the Orthodox Church celebrates the baptism and confirmation of catechized Orthodox Christians at that day, because it celebrates what we are without Christ. And of course, the sacraments are what Christ gives us in the Great Commission, which is confirmation and baptism.
That's brilliant. I mean, to be honest, I mean, I didn't realize that you were actually baptized and confirmed into Orthodoxy, because there's so many people that are wearing a cross, and it's almost like a fashion statement, and they're not, you know, they might say, oh yes, I'm a Christian, but are they actually abiding by Christian values and even reading the Bible? So I think, you know, that's a really interesting thing, that you have really gone the whole way, and you are, you know, you're actually walking your talk, and I think that's got to be commendable. You're quite brave. I think you're quite brave, and I would say you are controversial, but that's looking at me from the outside, and to you, you're not. That's quite interesting. But what do you know? Do you feel that you've actually paid personal prices for what you've stood up for?
Um, I would say that, like, I would disagree, because if you do this consensually, you understand what is the
Yeah.
consequence and the risks in taking it. There are so many people who are quite sensationalists, and they'll know going into this what they're risking, and then they'll like complain on the internet, oh, like I've lost all of these things, as if you didn't want to do this and you knew the risks you're going to take, because we don't live in a perfect world. We live in a pretty
Mm.
captured world, where, of course, people can find you out, ruin your reputation, ruin your chances of being employed outside of you being self-employed doing this. And even within your social circles, if people don't exactly agree with your politics and religion, uh, they can, you know, sort of move away from you. So I would say, compared to, I don't know, a nurse that said something controversial on Twitter and was sacked and potentially faces imprisonment, I'm not paying the same risk, even though the same thing
Mm.
could happen to me, because I'm deciding to do this. I'm deciding to put my face camera and do these things, go around the country talking to people about controversial issues. So it's just a part of the job, really.
Yeah, yeah. And what do you think is the hardest moment since you became publicly known?
Um, you know, I'm quite forward thinking of what I believe is going to happen going into this. And you said this as well beforehand. This idea that, you know, there's so many people who act like Christians but aren't. Dealing with right wing figures, and I'll give names, who are not Christian or spiritual, quite scandalous, but also trying to lead a movement of conservatives, people who believe in family, people who believe in liberty and freedom. Because I always say, I say this to my priest, I don't want to go to, you know, hell for what I do in politics, just simply because you have to separate the work from
Mm.
your religion. So one of the things that I think is the worst about doing this is dealing with people who aren't just sinful, because everyone is, but is intentionally malicious and deceptive.
Mm. Interesting. So, I mean, we've talked quite a bit about Christianity, and I think that's an important part, because I do feel that, and I'm sure you do as well, that we've lost our moral compass. Particularly, I mean, our politicians have no moral compass at all. And do you think there's a you know, there's room to bring morals and ethics into politics, or do you think we have to start all over again, because politics has been proven to not work at the moment? I mean, it's not working, is it?
I would say that, first of all, when we talk about Christianity and politics, especially within Orthodox parishes, they don't like the idea. And it's because it traditionally comes from a sort of evangelical American Bible Belt aspect, that seems incredibly fake to a lot of people and inauthentic, just simply because it was a very recent innovation in like the 1800s. So we have to be very careful of how far you integrate your religion into your politics. Now, what I would say is, politicians themselves aren't deprived of a moral compass. There are a lot of Christians who are members of parliament, but it is just simply lobbying. It is simply holding the party line, which is the problem. So I don't know how much you can actually mitigate that without removing either certain essential features within democracy. So it's just a question of, well, how much freedom do you want? And if you do want freedom, it will cause, you know, corrupt and bad actors to actually be able to be elected into parliament. And also, how do you reduce the things that are causing people to capitulate their moral compass in simply legislating laws for the sake of big donors or for the sake of holding party lines?
Well, yeah, I mean, we've got a situation now where the sanctity of life is actually being, is being overlooked by our politicians when you look at assisted dying and the abortion laws. So I I would argue there is a lack of moral compass, surely, or not? You don't agree?
Yeah, I would say, like, I give this famous example of a Lib Dem MP when the bill that would allow abortion up until delivery was being passed through the first stages of the House of Commons, and he was denied communion. So obviously these people come from a background of
Mm.
knowing that's a sin. Jacob Rees-Mogg, he did an interview once where someone asked him on Good Morning Britain, well, because you're a Catholic, do you believe abortion is a sin? And he said, unfortunately, I do. So, the individual person, they
Mm.
do understand that this is the sanctity of life we're talking about. But
Mm.
I just feel like when you're in politics and you're not in Christianity, a lot of these people will just forget the things that ground them as
Yeah.
people just simply for working in the framework of politics. And it's the censorship
Mm.
of being taken seriously, and it's the censorship of potentially not getting comfortable positions in politics, which is really used as a leverage against these people not to speak out against abortion. Even within like the Conservative Party, I imagine that if someone was quite outspoken about abortion laws, they would immediately have their whip removed and they wouldn't be allowed to go on TV, for example. So that sort of leverage already completely disables any Christian within the Houses of Parliament from actually
Mm.
talking about this. But maybe I do agree, especially within the House of Lords. I mean, these are the sort of individuals who have the freedom to do absolutely anything because they're simply handed out peerages because they're the best mate of the Prime Minister. And even then, they allowed it to pass through.
Yeah. No, I've seen that all happening. So I mean, let's just talk now about how you have had people criticize and say, "Oh, you're dividing," because you bring up issues that are are already divided, like transgenderism, the migrants, feminism. The problem with masculinity, and possibly we could talk about marriage. So let's start with maybe transgenderism. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of people that I've seen you being attacked, and they feel very, very strongly. And are you seen as somebody that's you have exclusive, you have this exclusive view on how things should be? So what do you say about that with people that say, well, you're actually excluding me from that conversation because I'm not what you think I should be? So how do you
I would say
counteract
that
that?
on all of these issues, transgenderism, abortion,
Yeah.
migration, masculinity, traditional values, you have to hold to the hardline position. And the reason why I say that is I always give this story. And one of the main motivations for why in the summer between year 11 and college I decided to and do this was I'm a sort of a cliche. I'm a failed drama student that moved into conservative politics. And when I was part of the theatre company in my secondary school, it was during Sunak's jokes about transgenderism. He did a joke to Keir Starmer at the time of him being in the leader of the opposition. And everyone who was rehearsing at the time, and this would be the last play I would ever do in year 11, because this was the last time I'd ever see them, because they didn't really like me on a personal level. And I was being quite, fair and diplomatic with these people. I wasn't saying that I outright disagree with the sort of prospects that a man can be a woman. I was just simply saying, well, the reason why Sunak is doing this joke is because a lot of people in this country feel this way. And then I gave, examples of arguments that I would give, but suggesting that other people would give it. And I was saying it for the sake of
Yeah.
being fair and
Yeah.
just simply having the other side being heard. And because I said that, the last day of the show that we did for this particular production, a group of year 11 students who knew they wouldn't be punished because the drama teachers knew who I was and how controversial I was, and they didn't really do anything about it because it would put the school into dispute. They told me to go kill myself. They said that they were like constantly pestering me to leave. They said that no one actually liked me from like the 4 years I was doing this. And the reason why that was so impactful was coincidentally, or rather intentionally in the case of the person who said it, someone actually tried to commit suicide in our school. They had to air ambulance out a student who put himself in a noose. So at the same period of time that someone tried to take their life, someone who was defending, or rather attacking me because I'm not totally pro-trans, telling me to go kill myself. So I was like, you can't be diplomatic with these people at all. Because it seems like even when you're trying to be nice with people and you appease them a bit and you sort of deliver your ideas in a very comfortable way, you immediately let with people suggesting that you should take your own life just simply because you disagree with them. And that is why with a lot of my banners, I hold to a hardline position because you can't appease a position that its foundational principles are built on a falsehood, or with the case of transgenderism, built on comforting a mental disorder. I mean, you always give this example of, I don't know, someone who doesn't eat just simply because they have body dysmorphia. Transgenderism, if we were to insert into that sort of case, just simply comforts the person with the mental illness. It says that you are right in being wrong. You are in the wrong body, whatever that means. So you can't be nice with that opinion. You have to be divisive.
So that's really shocking. That's really shocking that that happened. How did that impact you? Because how did that?
Like I said before, it's just you can't be nice with these opinions. You have to hold to the hardline position, even if you're disliked for it, even if they hate you. They'll secretly hate you anyways even if you slightly diverge away from the orthodoxy of their
Yeah.
belief. So why try to act like you like each other, even though there's a lot of spite, vitriol, and tension between you, when
Yeah.
you can just be honest with everyone? This is what I believe. If I'm singled out for it, okay, great, fantastic. I know I'm right anyways. Let's engage with it. And this sort of American modeling of tabling at universities and liberal captured cities, the reason why it's so successful in America is that and you saw this with Trump's um, election because he won by a landslide for the first time. I think it was like 52%. It was because a lot of the moderate base that would either go Democrat or Republican saw a lot of what Charlie Kirk was doing. And they noticed that his very moderate takes were met with such vitriol and hatred. So they related the lack of articulation, the hatred from the left to the people that Charlie was disagreeing with their political positions and the parties that they support, whilst relating the sensibleness, the calmness, the articulation of Charlie and the Republican Party. So that is why the American format of tabling is becoming slowly more popular with different elements on right-wing activists here in this country, and that's why it's necessary. We need to be honest with people on what we believe. We can't be dishonest. In the case of Reform UK, they're already trying to do that, packaging their beliefs in a different way, trying to get to as many people as possible. It won't work. Being honest, having a good campaign for your ideas, and then honestly showing the people that you disagree with how they express themselves when they disagree with you.
I'm sure a lot of you know about magnesium.
For all your anti-Big Pharma needs, look no further than clivedecarl.com.
I had rheumatoid arthritis so badly I couldn't walk or get dressed.
He sells a fantastic range of top-quality supplements.
Worked out that magnesium dissolves calcium, and I haven't had any arthritic problems in over 40 years.
This tabling, this is kind of, I mean, I must say you argue very well. I've watched you and you argue very well. In the same vein as Charlie Kirk, you're very eloquent. Do you see yourself almost like a Charlie Kirk, a UK Charlie Kirk?
No, I think that title has been thrown around with so many different figures. I feel like it's just simply because, I mean, the first time someone ever suggested that title was during the vigil that we held for Turning Point UK. And I said, listen, this has nothing to do with the careers of any single person outside of trying to celebrate and give reverence to someone who was assassinated just simply for talking to someone. I am nothing like Charlie Kirk if you actually look at my personality and what I've done. Yeah. I'm far too much of someone who's been arrested, films protests. I also do tabling, which is something that Charlie also did. But I didn't set up a multi-million-pound organization. I haven't been able to unite the right in the same way that he did in America. There are so many things that made Charlie special and important within the right-wing movement in America that only time will tell if I have the same qualities. But even on like a religious level, for example, he was an evangelical. I'm an Orthodox Christian, which means that inevitably our opinions are going to divert. The reason why I like Charlie actually was he was one of the only evangelical Christians. And the Catholics for America, they did a conference recently where they did a video commemorating Charlie Kirk because he sympathized a lot with Catholicism and Orthodoxy. A few months before he died, he interviewed an Orthodox father, and he was incredibly prepared just to listen. He seemed very excited when people were suggesting to him, this is the reasons why, for example, we don't have pews within the Orthodox Church and we simply stand when we pray because we're trying to give reverence and respect to God. He was listening, he was attentive. He also said that the evangelicals under-venerate Mary, which is something that if you ever go to an evangelical community, it's something they'll never admit because they
Exactly.
believe that I am an idolater for having icons and venerating saints who are in heaven. So I like Charlie. I agree with what a lot of he said. I think that what he started at Turning Point is something that no one else probably could do. That is why I don't like to compare myself, especially even if I go on and beyond and further, I live longer than Charlie, what he did. Do I really want to be living in someone else's shadow? Absolutely not. I want to do my own thing. I have my own personality, my own views. I absolutely will adopt the certain traits of other people in the right wing space, which will then slowly build up my character. But I don't want to be compared to someone who should be laid to rest.
Absolutely. No, that's good. That's good. And you are very much an individual. And actually, as you say, he came very much from the evangelical side. And you're very different. There's a lot of differences there. But the way that you can articulate is spot on. That's where I think your strength lies, and you're doing so well at it. So the tabling, are you doing that through Project Britannia?
Yeah, I just thought of so with Turning Point UK, one of the main reasons why I left, and it's quite openly publicised, because when I left, there was a sort of disagreement and they kicked me out. I made it very public on Twitter. I also secretly tried to record me saying the things that I'd very happily publicly say and have done so in the past. Was because, first of all, I think that you can take an American format, but you can't take American politics. What we need to talk about in the UK is not what needs to be talked about in the United States. Even the relationship that the United States has with the UK, if you speak to any person who does American politics in the States, if you ask them about the UK, they will give a very bland, vanilla explanation, and also quite an insulting one as well. Despite the fact that, yes, we do have problems with freedom of speech, they will say that our country is like a third world country that gets everyone immediately arrested if they say anything against Keir Starmer as if he's some sort of dictator, and that the United States, in a way that, that eagle is symbolizing, need to come down and save us all. I don't think that's true. I think that taking American politics into the United Kingdom, when right-wing popularism in the United States is slowly crumbling because of the certain divisions between the MAGA and American First base, is something very dangerous to do. A lot of people suggest here in the UK that we're in like a 6-year delay. I hope that's not true. I hope we're something completely different. But I take the format. And when we're with Turning Point UK, they incredibly restricted things that I could say at these stands. They said that I can talk about abortion because they wanted to work with other political parties and with Reform and the Conservative Party. And they said that we wouldn't have that prospect to work with you if you talked about abortion, just simply because no one wants to touch it. They said they would have to look at every single tweet I posted, vet it before I post it, which is something I don't want to do. And if you compare what Turning Point UK is here in this country compared to the States, it is simply a social media page that just relies on the name carrying the brand and also just re-uploading other, Charlie Kirk videos because they have the right to Charlie's catalog of videos. They just re-upload it, take the money, and that's job done. So I left.
So it's not a real thing. It's not a real
here
thing.
in the UK. No, not really.
Right. Okay.
Luckily, because the name attracts attention, there has been students that do want to do stuff. So there is an Oxford chapter at Turning Point, but they don't get any support from Turning Point UK itself. But the main business, and they've said this to me when I was with them, is we just re-upload other people's videos, we get the money from monetization, there you are, bosh, call it a day. And anything else was done off the backs of other students who genuinely believed, and this is the reason why they've had a sort of somewhat sizable boost. That is just simply because Charlie Kirk's death immediately here in the UK, everyone wanted to immediately drift onto Charlie's legacy. But when Charlie came to the Oxford Union, I wonder why he never met with people from Turning Point UK and just spoke to Liz Truss. It was because he even knew, because I heard it from other people close to him. He even knew that it was very grifty. So, considering how much it actually costs to start off this project of just tabling at universities, getting branded material, getting pamphlets, talking with people, it's not that much. I can do it myself. I know what I want to talk about, and I can keep on hacking at it whilst also respecting the people that came before me.
Yeah. And obviously, you talk about traditional values. What do you think that really means in 2026? Because obviously, we used to have the family values, sort of up until about, the 1950s, and then it kind of went a bit wonky in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s and so on. So what does it mean? Not in theory, but in everyday life. What do those traditional family values mean now? Because the demographic has changed so much, hasn't it?
Yeah, so the demographics have changed, both in terms of the population of the country, but also finances. So one of the main reasons that contributed towards, as you said, towards the 70s, 80s, 90s, the sort of family unit, nuclear family, masculinity and femininity sort of fell away from the populace, is because people were financially independent. And also we started moving away from nationalism. We were like corporate individuals, like economic units. So people could be independent and just do whatever they want and express themselves as an individual. But Christianity and my beliefs, we're more communalist. So I believe that we should invest into a community of people that network and rely on each other. So that means that, first of all, the economy has to be at a state where you can just have one breadwinner, and that can supply for more than one child, because that's one of the main reasons why you have record high abortions. It's not just a degenerate culture; it's also the economics of it. We don't help families. We don't help mothers. That is why I'm probably one of the only conservatives that's against the two-child benefit cap, because despite the fact I do understand that you will have Abdul who has 10 kids and only has those 10 kids for the sake of claiming benefits, you also have a lot of native children who are put into abstract poverty just simply because the people who are having these children can't afford it. And yes, we should, as a government, give a bit of a way to have more children, because it will help our population in terms of having workers to then help the elderly people retire. And it also helps fuel a healthy culture, and a healthy culture ensures we don't have what we're currently seeing with like a knife crime epidemic in London, for example.
Yeah. And as far as the migration thing goes, I mean, what I've noticed, and I grew up in, I didn't grow up, I grew up in Kent. I was lucky, I grew up in rural Kent, but I brought my children up in southeast London, and it was very multicultural. But that had been brought through very slowly, and people had integrated. In southeast London, you've got, all my neighbours were black or Asian, but they worked hard. They were family oriented, and it was a really nice community to live in. But what would you say about the speed and the volume of what's happening now? Because that is not integration, is it? And if you talk against, if you speak out against that, you're called a racist. So what do you have to say about that?
I would say that it's sort of a generational gap. You'll see that young people such as myself is a bit more radical than yourself, because you can reminisce at a time where migration was in such a way that you had quality targeted migration, which meant that you could then, begin to call people who weren't originally from here British. You could definitely identify the sort of migrants who civically had a sort of patriotic way of thinking and positively contributed to our economy. But then when you get someone like myself, who was born in 2008, you have not only austerity, but you also have mass controlled waves of migration, which then people begin to start thinking, well, I've never seen a targeted form of migration system that has been successful and healthy in this country, so it must mean that all migration's bad. Or it must mean that we have to deport everyone. And that is the sort of wave of ethno-nationalism that you're seeing in this country. I think it's more of a generational gap. So I would even say on the extreme side, it's just a natural response of the state of the country and the way that people were born. It's just a natural product of their birth. But when it comes to the accusation that you're racist and censorship, and that is because the sort of Marxist idea that we can constantly progress through society and we could reach a state of perfection and a sort of communist utopia has led people to believe that they can excuse certain people who come into this country who want to culturally dominate our people and also bring in certain ideas that are fundamentally un-British. We can excuse that group of people because it must be our unconscious bias that we don't like these people and we must discriminate against these people if we don't want them here to begin with. So it's certainly a form of colonial white guilt that has led a lot of the people who have manufactured mass migration to allow them to stay in our country, which has then unfortunately had the impact of the right wing then completely forgetting in recent history the sort of migration that we want in this country, or at least that we can tolerate in this country.
So do you feel that years ago, I mean, in the 60s, it was post-war that we had the Windrush. We had the people from the Caribbean coming in because at the end of the day, it was part of the Commonwealth, and we did have at that point a shortage of jobs for people because we'd lost so many people during the war, and they came to do jobs that people couldn't do in the 1950s and 60s. But there was still a huge amount of racism going on. But what changed? Because obviously that happened. And some of those people do feel that they're British because they've been here for so long. They've been born in Britain and several generations since. So, I mean, with this argument, do we still regard them as British, or do we? Would you say that they're not British? What are your feelings?
So I don't know if you've been exposed to this on the internet recently, but there's been this massive culture war discussion of what it means to be British. Now, inevitably, it just means if you're a subject of the Union, so if you're a citizen of England, Wales, Scotland, and Ireland, people have neglected that definition because, as I've said before, we're in such a bad state that people hold to the hardline position of ancestry, which then excludes the sort of people who came here post-World War II or even served in the Commonwealth during the Second World War. I would say that we have had an issue with the Windrush generation. The sort of knife crime epidemic has traceable roots to when the Windrush generation came into certain boroughs of London. I think that's the unfortunate consequence of having a deficit of workers, whilst also coupling that with the extension of what it means to be British, because during the introduction of the Commonwealth, you could be a British citizen overseas if you were a member of the Commonwealth, and also aero travel, because it was still a relatively new phenomenon at the time. And that was sort of what Enoch Powell was talking about in his time. He was talking about the definition to be British according to Commonwealth overseas territory, the waves of mass migration in places like Leicester because of aero travel, and also the post-Second World War period when you had a deficit of workers. So that is simply the unfortunate consequences of going into a global conflict. You need the workers, and of course you can't have, just like that, a bunch of people having kids that can then instantly grow up to then be workers. So you needed that, but then that had the unfortunate consequences of importing certain social and cultural elements that had then grown into this country to be a problem. I mean, look at Notting Hill Carnival. It is an absolute cesspit of degeneracy and also knife crime. I was there last year recording. There's metal detectors in every single entrance to the carnival, and you can just film people as the police just take out their knives or drugs. But I would say that censorship is a huge problem when it comes to migration because there's so much factions on the right wing that you can be mischaracterized. Are you a reformer? Are you someone who's a member of Restore Britain? Are you a full-blown total remigration ethno-nationalist? And that is brilliant for the left because then they can just go to the small 1% of white supremacists, for example, and say, well, they do exist, so they must exist in every single aspect on the right wing.
Yeah, I mean, it is an interesting conversation, this, because being in Southeast London, my children grew up as teenagers there, and they all got mugged. All my kids got mugged, but not in their what they used to call their manner. They weren't mugged, but they were mugged if they stepped outside because they went to school with these kids. They wouldn't mug their friends. So it was a really interesting thing, but things have got much, much worse. I mean, I have to say I found it very distressing when my kids got mugged. If they went outside, if they went to Greenwich or somewhere, we were in Peckham, East Dulwich, and it was interesting because I did at one point work with deprived children who had been excluded from school because they were in gangs, and they were almost they weren't able to stay in school. Some of them could barely communicate, and it wasn't their fault that they'd been brought up that way. And so it was that horrible sort of thing where you think that you're helping by going and working with them and helping them get through their A levels or their O levels or whatever that they need to get on. But it is an interesting thing because we've been put in this situation. It's been foisted upon us, usually by global decisions, isn't it? It's by, for instance, problem, reaction, solution. A lot of what they're saying now is, we've destabilized the Middle East, therefore we have to have these migrants. But we didn't make those decisions. It was our politicians, and I think it is a playbook. It's a playbook.
We weren't the ones to totally make the decisions to go into the Middle East. It's mostly America and Israel. And in fact, I do see when people say this, I agree with them, right? When you bomb a country, they don't want to stay there, so they go to another country. But then you have two issues. First of all, if you close the hole in the fence, it doesn't matter how many people are on the other side of the fence, they still can't get in because the hole in the fence has been filled. The second thing as well, that would then instantly assume that the people who we've just bombed want to go to our country, which seems counterintuitive unless you're part of some sort of terrorist cell, which you're seeing in Iran currently. A lot of Iranian migrants are either part of the diaspora, which means they're quite pro-monarchists. They're sort of the brain drain. On average, your average member of the diaspora is actually more educated and owns more money than an average member who lives in Iran. And that's because after the Shah fell, a lot of the people who profited over the sort of westernization over his reign moved over into the West. But then you also have the migrants who are part of terrorist cells. So, the people who are pro-IRGC, people who are pro the regime itself, going into this country, setting up cells. And what you see at times of Middle Eastern destabilization is a lot of these cells are decentralized, but they begin to merge together to then plan attacks. That's why intelligence agencies around the world are just going, red alert on potentially an attack, just simply because they unalived a lot of people who are key within the current regime. But we don't have any say in it. The special relationship is very much one-sided. If America wants to go into a conflict, we either have to assist with them or deal with America because we've disagreed with them, which is Keir Starmer's current position. He's had to play a defensive capacity in this war to protect some of the Gulf states from being bombed from Iranian drones, but then he's also, at the same time, pissed off Trump.
And what about our special relationship? Is it gone? I mean, what do you feel about all of that? Is it a loss, or is it okay, fair enough?
I have no idea. Trump at this current moment, I feel like a lot of his domestic policies, so his tariff campaign, for example, has been made illegal from Congress. So I think what Trump is doing is he notices that on a domestic level, he's achieved what he wants to achieve, and what he can't achieve, his promises, he's just going to give up. So he has to then gravitate his campaign on an international level. That's why he tried to give peace from Israel and Palestine. That's why he failed to give peace with Russia and Ukraine. And that is why he's now going into Iran, because a lot of the neoconservatives in America really wanted that. And a lot of the Iranian diaspora, which I'm assuming trickled into people convincing him to go into the war, then mistaking him to believing that a lot of people in Iran wanted this conflict. So I have no idea whether he's an ally of Trump. He made this, in his first administration, massive focus that he wanted to help Europe, that he had ancestry in Scotland, in England, so he wanted to help the United Kingdom. Then, of course, you had his security release where he said that he wanted to help patriotic parties in Europe get elected because he noticed that America was going to fail during the midterms. So instead of having the right-wing sphere of influence being in the States, why can't it just be in Europe? And I think that synergistically goes with the recent release of a British CPAC coming to the United Kingdom in July between the 16th and 19th.
Join me, Sandi Adams, live at Goffinland, Exeter on the 14th of May, discussing 2030 and beyond, hosted by Emma Donwell, and music from Trevor John. If you manage to somehow have any influence in anything, say because you're only 17, aren't you? That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, you're incredibly articulate, you're knowledgeable. For somebody of your age, it is incredible. So if, for instance, Restore Britain had some influence and what would their solution be to the migrant problem right now? Because it is a problem. There's no doubt about it. It's a massive problem.
Restore Britain has a 120-page document that is far more comprehensive than Reforms. So comparatively, Reforms policy on migration is only 6 pages long and mostly found on Twitter posts. Restore Britain consulted migration lawyers and also the head of investigations at Restore Britain, because before becoming an established political party, they were also a pressure group pressuring right-wing parties. And you even had people like Susan Hall chairing Restore Britain. So it was had access to a lot of information. Rupert is the head of billing accounts, so scrutinising the civil service and how much they spend. And that's historic. The Conservative Party have never put independent MP into the billing accounts committee. So they have access to a lot of information through freedom of information requests, through Rupert Lowe being a member of parliament, and through also having previously chaired members of the Conservative Party. And I can't reduce the document in its entirety. Of course, it has the overlapping policies of leaving certain international agreements, so the UN Maritime Law, which prevents us from stopping the boats from coming here to begin with, to leaving the ECHR, to having our own Bill of Rights to ensure that we can actually dictate whether we even accept refugees to begin with. Because technically speaking, a lot of the people coming here illegally are doing it legally through an international framework, even though domestically our laws actually limit migrants from coming here. But with legal migrants, it's a matter of, firstly, compared to Reform UK, Restore will actually blacklist or red list, as they call it, workers' visas coming from Pakistan, because they are the largest visa overstayers in this country. And the reason why they won't do it, the reason why Reform won't limit Indian and Pakistani migration from this country is because they are, par Israel and Qatar, one of the biggest funded lobbying groups in this country. And historically, the Conservative parties have always been lobbied by them, like, for example, Rishi Sunak.
Yeah. Do you think there's a worry that there's so many extremists coming in along with these migrants? Because we don't know who's coming in, really. I mean, they could be Albanians, they could be Albanian criminals, they could be extremists. What do you think that the danger is with these people that we don't know who they are coming in?
Well, the thing is, yes, there is a possibility that a lot of these people are extremists. A lot of these people are just economic migrants who have no understanding of consent laws and see a white woman who is dressed quite modestly, but not in the same way that they commonly see women in niqabs and burqas and go out and commit crimes against women. But another thing, as we previously touched upon, a lot of these people aren't radicalized by their own religions. It's Western intervention. The problem is that we're accepting people into this country but don't like us because of historical indifferences. That inevitably is going to cause more problems as well. And another thing as well, migration, it isn't just one or two individuals, as we previously spoke about before in our history. It's not like we're accepting one person here, one person there. It's the fact that we're accepting communities of people. And if you talk about integration, which I don't really think exists, but I understand what people understand integration is, it can't happen when entire communities of people just aren't British, because they can never really tether themselves to a template of what it means to be British to begin with. So it is, yes, we are going to inevitably import a lot of criminals when you accept millions of people. But it's also these millions of people, they're not equally distributing their population across the United Kingdom, but rather staying in pockets. So they have like little Pakistan or whatever, or
So
little
they don't
Baghdad.
integrate, yeah. So there's no integration. They just stay, speaking their own languages and just staying in their own enclaves. Yeah. When you were covering the migrant hotels and things, what did you see there? Was there genuine concerns with those people in those areas that their women and girls were in danger?
Yeah, I studied a really interesting phenomena. These protests weren't organized by any big figures on the right wing. They were organized by local communities. And for the first time in a long time, these people had excuses to finally meet their fellow neighbor. This sort of post-war community mentality finally reverberate back into these communities. And it's for the strangest reason, organizing outside of a local migrant hotel. You saw this in Canary Wharf at Epping. They're finally getting together. It was a beautiful thing to see. They're finally celebrating, the small victories they got with like the council, whatever. They were planning together. They were planning big events. And it was a great thing to observe as someone who never went into these communities to begin with, and to see that people who never really knew each other or knew each other but didn't really spend a lot of time with each other, spending a lot of time with each other.
No, that's good. Now, changing the subject a little bit, let's very quickly, because I could talk to you for hours. We sort of haven't touched on feminism and masculinity, because what we've found is that actually, I mean, I feel, because I used to be a feminist, believe it or not, and I now really think that we were sold a pup, because we now have to pay, we work and we look after the children, and I feel that feminism. I remember watching Aaron Russo in a fantastic interview before he died. He was a film producer. He worked with Stanley Kubrick, and there is a fantastic interview of him. Literally, it's his last interview before he died. I think he had cancer, and he was talking about how he knew the Rockefellers, and how he knew I think it was David Rockefeller very, very well, and how the Rockefellers said to him, we were the ones that pushed feminism because we wanted to double the taxes, we wanted to separate the children from the parents, we wanted to destroy the family unit, and it was all done so easily through feminism. Would you agree with that's what's happened?
Yeah, the thing is, right, so feminism is supposed to celebrate the differences between women, right, and men, which is a great thing. And sometimes within media as well, when you celebrate feminism, it's celebrating how women are different from men. And you should celebrate those differences. But then modern waves of feminism, because I think there's like, 3 waves of feminism? It begins to then teach that men are just women, like in terms of the roles within society, and there is no differences between the sexes. So it inverts the initial movement of feminism, that we have to respect women because they're different. And despite the fact they have different roles, they're equally important because, one has to provide for the family, the other creates the family because they have the ability to make children. So equally they're important, equally they are a pillar for society, but they are different in the respect to their roles, right? So feminism sort of inverted itself, and then I think it went and derailed itself by teaching that women can absolutely do everything and anything, and you don't have to be grounded in the original traditional roles that made women who they are, because womanhood is not only just a biological reality, it's also certain social elements with it as well, certain obligations and roles that women have within society, which come from an observable fact of biology.
Absolutely. Men are men and women are women. And I quite honestly, I mean, looking also at the whole masculinity thing, where men are in a way almost they're not men anymore, because they're very confused as to what being a man really means, in my view. And then, I mean, the other day I watched Louis Theroux with the Manosphere, and that's when it goes to its other extreme, where men become absolutely awful to women, but because there's no there's no respect there in particularly in that particular, it was a documentary, and where you get women really men dominating women and being very cruel, and that is unacceptable in my view. What happened to men? Did they get somehow castrated by feminism? What happened to men?
My sort of understanding would be that, first of all, I love Louis Theroux's documentary on the manosphere because it perfectly highlights the sort of character and caliber of men that we're dealing with in the sort of red pill community. I don't think they seriously represent the genuine intentions and
No.
character of men, but rather they sort of represent when men and women have completely gatekeep themselves away from the opposite sex to a point where men have to have their own interpretation of women and women have to give their own interpretation of men because they never really interact with each other. That means that with toxic feminism, it's all men are rapists. And that is why with toxic masculinity, it's all women gatekeep sex and don't like men and will only use them for the sake of money. So it's the sort of two sides of the same coin. When men separate themselves from women, they don't have an understanding of each other, and they have to go along to their privately in their own corners and make this imagination of what the opposite sex actually really are in a real relationship. So I don't think they seriously represent what most men are. I think a lot of the time it is to play up to social media. If you look at the opinions being said by people like HS Tukitoki on those documentaries, his positions are inconsistent to a point where, it's obvious that he's just doing it to play up to the camera.
And you're engaged, I believe. Is that right? You have a fiance.
Yes.
But you obviously believe in the sanctity of marriage. Tell me a little bit more about what your views on marriage are.
Yeah, I believe that marriage is a sacrament that internally binds a man and a woman, as Christ does with his kingdom and the church. I also think in politics, it's what grounds people. Everyone in politics does the same thing, posts, podcasts, and posts, debate stands and tabling and whatever. But if you don't have that grounding, it can put you in a very dangerous place because a platform puts you in a position of power, especially amongst women. There are so many cases of a lot of people who are brilliant at articulating their beliefs that unfortunately led them to a very dark and scandalous place with women. So I needed someone quite quickly to ground me. Unfortunately, I had a relationship with a woman for over a year, so I just decided might as well. I see myself being with this woman for the rest of my life, so I might as well just get engaged for the sake of grounding myself.
That is so refreshing, I have to say. And it's true that women can ground men. It can be the other way around. But I do think there's something about a woman is almost like a supportive role. And that isn't in any way demeaning a woman. Even if you look at if you want to look at the religious aspect, why Mary is venerated is because she is the perfect woman. She's strong, and yet she's understanding. She's just everything in the perfect woman, and that's what I get from Catholicism. That's where they say, if you really want the perfect woman, it is Mary. She endured a huge amount, and she said yes to God in the very beginning, and that was a great burden to take. And in a way, when you take on a man, you're in that role. You're in that role of being the rock, the person that holds the family together. And I think that's a really beautiful thing.
There's been a lot of church fathers, getting off the top of my head, I was reading one where it talks about how God looks to women more favorably. God will traditionally answer the prayers of women on average more than they would with men in the Bible. And that goes for Mary as well. And that's why we emphasize Mary a lot on our liturgical prayers in liturgy. Because first of all, she is the one that begets and starts the incarnation of Christ into his ministry. We celebrate the Annunciation of Mary when the angel approaches her saying that you're going to bear God's son. So it is very important for us that and it is for women as well. Within Protestantism, it doesn't really have a effeminate feeling to it. It feels very hollow and sometimes fake for a lot of women. But with Catholic and Orthodox women, they are the converts that last the longest comparatively. And it is at the same time where they're also expected to, wear a veil when they're in church as well. So they are drastically moving towards traditionalism for no reason other than the fact they have good examples. Even, the saints behind me, um, Saint Mary of Egypt. She's a great example of a pious woman. I gave my fiance an icon once of a female saint, of Saint Mary of Egypt, just because there's not really good examples of women within other traditions of Christianity outside of the pantheon of saints that we have in our church.
So that's true. I mean, yeah, it's really good to hear all this actually, because yeah, I think I certainly believe that there seems to be a wave of people going back to this spirituality, this Christianity, and the solid, either Catholicism or Orthodoxy, because it is so ancient and it's so. And I've noticed that certainly there's been more people being accepted and received into these churches in the last couple of years. I mean, it's gone crazy, hasn't it? Have you noticed that?
Yeah, as I said before, one of the first things that we noticed is the church that baptized and confirmed me confirmed 15 people. On the same day, the year before, they only baptized one. In the
Yeah.
church right next to us, it was, I think, like 10 people got baptized for last year. Then the year afterwards, they baptized 125. They had to have the bishop come in and help with all the baptisms.
Yeah.
So it is happening at an exponential rate. I haven't visited the church in a while that I got baptized in, but whenever I see pictures from people that attend there, it's more and more young people. And that's the thing, the churches that are going to last for longest are the churches that have the young people inside of them, because there is an unfortunate expiration date when it comes to old people. And when you advertise solely towards old people, it excludes everyone else. Because there is a certain feeling when you walk into a church and it's full of 10 people and they are old and they are someone who's been to the church for like 20 years. It doesn't really feel welcoming.
Yes, there does seem to be this wave of new young people, and there's a lot of young men coming into my church, for instance, which I think is really encouraging, who do want to, and a lot of them, they've got fiancés who they're bringing into the church, which I think is amazing. So I think we there is this need for it because people are fed up with the way things have gone, I think. Do you think you'd agree?
Yeah, a lot of people just want results for their life, fulfillment, and stuff like that. We live in such a corporate world, so people want to know that there is something that is fulfilling them.
Yeah.
So that includes religion. And yes, it does seem like there's a pattern of friends being put along in churches, partners as well. Because people, if you've never been to a church before, it's really intimidating. Sometimes I get intimidated walking into Orthodox services I've never been into before. Because sometimes, you can muck it up and you never know how people are going to judge you. So that helps a lot. Just being youth orientated and welcoming newcomers is the best thing a church can do, and that is why a lot of the churches that do that are very successful. In fact, a friend from Speaker's Corner, there's a beautiful Oriental church called St. Mark's. I think I'm right in saying it's St. Mark's in London, and it's just got so many young people, so many. It's huge, and that's big for an Oriental church because it's always a denomination that doesn't get commonly a lot of converts because it's a very skewed denomination of Orthodoxy that has some different doctrines with traditional East Orthodoxy and Catholicism. And the reason why they've done that is because they've upped up their social media profile. They have so many young people that welcome them. And Sky News did a report on this. There's so many new young people moving into apostolic Christianity, which is giving a lot of people a bright future into the direction of a lot of these young people and where they're going to be at in a few years' time.
And really, we have to bring that message of peace to the world because that is a conversation we're not having at the moment, and peace is the way forward. I think you'd agree.
It seems like as well, Orthodoxy and Catholicism are one of the highly persecuted denominations of the church. That they're the proselytizing denominations that brought Christianity to so many prosecuted parts of the world, from places like Islam and stuff. So they really know what it means to need peace. So when Orthodoxy and Catholicism has a stronger foothold on the West and more politicians begin to become devout Orthodox and Catholic Christians, their spiritual fathers would advise them accordingly. I mean, Saint
Yeah.
Pope Leo said, and he quoted I forget which passage it is in the Bible, where it talks about the prayers of people who start wars and cause blood will not be heard. And he said that in response to the war in Iran. So when you get into a Christianity that has people that held you to account, so your spiritual father and priest, and you have a Christianity that historically has faced persecution from different groups of people, they begin to respect more the sanctity of life and also just war theory, which was famously came up with by Saint Augustine.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, listen, I think we're going to have to wrap up now, but what I wanted to ask you, is there anything else that you'd like to say? Final parting words?
Not really.
No, I think
I'm
we've
a
covered
pretty
most
open
of it. Yeah, brilliant. Well, listen, I've just got to say, I really, really think that this has been a really interesting conversation. It's a conversation that's been needed. And I just want to thank you so much for coming on to 2030 and beyond. And I wish you great luck in and with whatever you're doing right now, because I think you're doing things that are good. And I just want to thank you.
Well, it's a pleasure. Always like it when it's positive reception, because typically it isn't. It's usually someone shouting at my face or throwing a bottle of questionable substances at my face. So,
well, that means you're doing the right thing, and you know that because what happened, to Jesus Christ. I mean, look at him. What did he go through? So you must be doing the right thing. I'm not saying you're Jesus Christ. You're absolutely not.
No. It's wearing your cross. There's a famous story, just to close off, of a person approaching a priest and saying, "Father, can you pray for me? I believe that my cross, and the bigger the cross, the higher, the more issues you might face in your life, right? It's supposed to be symbolic." He says, "Father, I've had too big of a cross. Pray for me." Prays for him. He sleeps. He goes into a dream where an angel presents him with different sizes of crosses, and he says, "Pick which cross you would want to hold." And because he believes, he's pious, he picks up a medium-sized cross and says, "You know what? This is a cross that I want." And the angel said, "You wouldn't want that. It's bigger than the cross that you currently hold." And he points to the smallest cross in the room and says, "That is the cross that you currently hold." Despite the fact that man believes that his cross is too hard to bear, the angel presents him with the actual size of the cross that he's been bearing, and it's the smallest out of the entire room. So I carry that story knowing that other problems are bigger for some people than others.
I think that's a really lovely way to wrap up, actually. Thanks so much. And hopefully we'll speak again at some point. Thank you, Bob.